to coast. All right, so does everyone have, if you don't have it signed, you got, it'd be a pain and you might get violation one classes, just let me know. Roll the dice, see what you get. And were you able to sleep last night after watching Plan 9? No, that's pretty scary. All right, so where do we finish here? Oh, panic. So let's finish up the panic. Here we go. I'm going to go fast, so be ready. Panic happened in the Vietnam War and then today. History is done. Nothing but time, miles, and practice tests. All right. Did we get to this?
Yeah.
So let's go. We got the populist party with all that populist ideas, but oversupply, all these financial instruments where we did the flim flam finance.
Yeah.
Flim flam finance. Say that 3 times really fast. Come on, let's go. All right. So one more thing happened to, do we get this? So they repealed the Sherman-Silver Purchasing Act. And when they repealed the Sherman-Silver Purchasing Act, now Clayton made a good point. He wanted to repeal because it's just storing the silver in basements. But that took $4 million a month out of the economy. Just when the economy is slowing down, remember we call that the deflationary curve? There's already less money in circulation, and then they take more money out. And by the government doing that, actually we have a name for it in the 20th century through today, we'll get to it a little bit later, it's called austerity. They suck that money out, all of a sudden, that made demand drop further, that made the depression even worse, and destroyed cities of Montana. Butte was hammered. If not for the demand for copper that would start to pick up in about 3 years, Butte would have been gone. But almost all the remaining quick little boom towns and mining camps, almost all closed. Almost all of them. Just the silver that were repealed. But with that, and almost immediately, with all the unemployment, there was talk of this could be the revolution. Remember, we just had Homestead last year, the year before. Over 24,000 strikes for the last 30 years of the century. And they were talking about revolution, fearful of revolution, their anarchist attacks, especially in Europe, not so much in the US yet. But it looked like this could be the beginning. And this was worldwide. This worldwide recession and more anarchist attacks took place. It really seemed like it. And that is a picture of the panic. And if you ever type in, let's say you go on the Google and type in on the Google, the panic of any financial panic, this picture will come up somewhere. That's actually from 1893. And so think about a panic. People have all these pieces of paper that have my savings account is on a piece of paper back then, or I have a stock or a bond, something I expect to get money back. I think this is worth money. The crash happens and it's worthless. And so here, you see all the paper, those are the stocks. And they're shoving them into the cupboard. And this is a good panic. That's a pretty good panic face. And then you see the people lined up at the bank in panic, and I like this go, wah! But I think you can all see my favorite part. Duck. Why is there a duck? The only thing that's saving us, waterfowl. Okay, so, do I have to write this down? So I was looking at a business cycle thing, and I thought, well, what are the many decent graphs on the internet? And this is definite proof that on the internet, you'll find out that most of it's garbage. This is one of these so-called scholarly diagrams of the business cycle. And what does that tell you? Yeah, I think it's got to be less than nothing. There are so many bad things on the internet. This is one, this is from Econ Education Link to help people. Okay, there's a peak and then a trough. Thank you. Nailed it. I should add, speaking about peaks and troughs, did anyone see there are 2 really big news stories? The first one that the Chinese spy balloons are spying on Montana.
Money.
But what do we have in Montana? Yeah, we have 150 Minuteman 3 ICBMs. And they seem to be making the grand tour, and they've done this before. It doesn't tell them anything. Satellites can pick up just as much, but they're doing the tour now to North Dakota, and I'm sure the balloon will sweep back. It's about 70,000 feet. The only reason the Pentagon and the government said anything about it is they basically just kind of ignored it. But people started seeing it, including the local news and Billings picked it up. They were showing it. Yes.
Do you think anyone will dust the bridge?
It's not even really worth it.
Yeah.
It'd be easy to shoot down, but it's 70,000 feet. But remember, satellites, the Chinese have satellites in geocentric orbit over the United States, and they can read license plate numbers. So the balloon doesn't tell them anything. It's just a little, they're just jabbing us. They're just, see, look what we're doing. And it appears that they've been doing it. But Secretary of State of the United States was going to go, or Secretary of Defense, no, I'm sorry, Secretary of State was going to go to China tomorrow, and they canceled the trip because this became public. So the Cold War is going. The other thing is, I'll talk about the economy. And I told you last week that the GDP in the last quarter went up 2.9%, which is pretty high. Did anyone see the job numbers this morning? The United States created 517,000 jobs, which is huge. And so even though they're cutting tech jobs like mad, other jobs are being created. That gets to the point the economy appears to be much stronger than most people think, which is weird. The economy is actually really strong, but we don't know exactly where it is. Is it near the peak or the trough? Okay, so also, this is going to blow you away. During the panic, the zoo in Central Park, the doors somehow were laid open. All the animals escaped. True, all the animals started running out. And so here's rhinoceros, there's a tiger or a lion. Somebody supposedly punched a tiger to keep them from attacking them. I had to do that, going to school every day. Miles City, tigers everywhere. Had to do that. And that's true, animals were roaming New York City, adding to the panic.
They were way tougher.
Oh, so much tougher. People back then were a different breed. You know, tigers were more aggressive.
They feel fair.
My generation. Huh?
They feel fair.
Unless they usually wore clothes. Degree of difficulty goes up. So at that, well, I didn't put the dates, but 1894. That next year, to show you how bad things got, unemployment went up dramatically. Hundreds of or thousands of people, they would give up everything. They lost their jobs, especially miners in Montana, and they marched on Washington, D.C., following a man by the name of Jacob Coxey, who said, unemployed people need help from the government. They're the only ones who could do it. And the plan was to march to Washington, D.C. and demand the government give them jobs. And so the government, which doesn't have the same issues that private business, that's not property, have to pay debts, they shut their doors, the government could buy them jobs, get them jobs. And that would increase demand and help the country get out of the depression. And so this panic would turn into a depression, which is kind of what happened during, for example, the New Deal to get the United States out of the Great Depression. But anyways, it shows you how desperate people were. I mean, just imagine if you were, in that situation, you lost your job and have nothing, and you figured your only recourse is to march on the Capitol and demand help. Not just demand help from home, but march on Washington, D.C. You'd have to be to the point of just absolute hopelessness. So this gives you an idea of how desperate people were. And so Coxey called it his army or his grand army, yes. So what happened was, for example, miners around Missoula, they went to Missoula where the nearest railhead was on the Pacific River. Good question. They all went there. And they went and they would march through town and they would ask money. Ask for pennies, nickels, whatever, to try to help them to get along the way. They carried blankets and they throw money in. And so they all went there. Well, Missoula started to become a little commercial center in this area. Also controlled by a couple of monopolies, some mercantile, things like that. But anyways, they didn't want all these unemployed people because they had unemployed people who actually lived in Missoula also, and they're all coming there. And so they started asking for money, basically saying, if we don't get enough money to get on the train to start moving east, we're gonna stay. And so some of the people, kind of the leading wealthier people in Missoula, not leading, but wealthier, they got money together to help pay for the members of this going to be Fox's army to get out of Missoula. And they gave them enough to take the train to Butte. And then let Butte deal with it. And they figured out real fast, oh, okay, we'll give you sound and say, we're not leaving Billings at all unless you, that's how. So good question. And so they went there and showed up. And the amazing thing is, I didn't type this down, it passed the House. A small jobs bill passed the House. But remember, what else does it have to pass? And that's where Bill's going to die. It did not pass the Senate. Coxey's army remained. They kind of encamped on the White House or the Capitol, the lawn from the Capitol. So the Capitol, the legislature, to get rid of them, retroactively had them arrested by creating a new law saying you can't walk on the grass. And they did it retroactively, saying you're on the grass, we're gonna arrest you. So basically, they just arrested Coxey as a political offense. They didn't like what he was saying. And because of this, the thing gets made. Most of the people either went back home or went to kind of wander. Washington, D.C. was a tiny little town back then relative to what it is now. They just left. Now, this is actually really sad and tragic. But think about when I talked about revolution, an army, calling themselves an army, marching on Washington, D.C. Doesn't that sound like a revolution? And then the next step, especially, so here's mocking Coxey's army, the ragtag group. They're poor, they're desperate. And here's showing at the same time, you have business leaders marching on Washington, D.C. to demand government aid for their businesses. Basically bailouts, which they mostly got. I wonder how would happen now. That's me pondering. Pretty good, huh? Of course it would. If you know anything about the financial crash, they gave the banks trillions. So, at the same time, a massive strike. Well, actually, it started in the Pullman Railway Carriage Company, and they made the really fine, fancy rail cars and dining cars, first-class cars for passenger trains. And here's the factory. It's back then a lot cooler than factories today. Got to admit, right? The architecture was just different. It was much more ornate. Took a lot more pride in the appearance, where it's very utilitarian now. But had a company town. Remember, they're paid in script. They raised the rents in the company town, raised the prices in the stores. And they turned around to the Pullman workers who they've already cut their wages at the end of '93. And they said, we're going to cut your wages by a third or quit. We got all these people going to take the job. So that's what they did. But, these lined up men here, these are Pinkertons, and they put them in Pullman uniforms, like they're a police, but they're actually just hired thugs. Well, the Pullman workers went on strike. They went on strike. And they realized, and this is really scary, you go on strike. The earthquake was a little scary too. You go on strike during the Depression. There's all these people who take your job for nothing. They're starving. They just got done, Coxey's army just ended. Imagine a group of people, farmers, workers, everybody just walking to the Capitol for what they want. But they struck. Really dangerous to do this. But the American Railway Union, led by Eugene Debs, who I've mentioned before, Debs decided to join the strike, realizing it could happen to railway workers, and convinced them to boycott, which is also called in union terms, don't cross the picket line. The men striking, marching with signs, the picket line. They would not work on any carriage with a Pullman car. And wouldn't work on any carriage. There is a standoff between railway workers, and that's actually the Army. But the entire rail network of the United States shut down. This should remind you, remember the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, straight up. Overnight, all rail traffic stopped. And local governments, especially in Illinois, for example, were really scared to do what the businesses wanted. Send out the militia and force them back to work. But, man, it is the constitutional duty of the United States government to deliver the mail. And where did the mail get around at this time? On trains. And so what the railroads did is they made sure that any train that had a Pullman car, right behind it was a mail car. And so if the American Railway Union doesn't work on that car, they're violating the Constitution. It's very clever. And Debs realized real quick, it's a scam. They're tricking us. They're trying to get the government to step in and force us back to work. Well, that's what's going to happen. This will allow the Attorney General, who was an old railroad lawyer, to get an injunction, a court order, which would become probably the most effective way to fight unions after that, a court order to go back to work. Now, Debs said, no, we won't do it. This is a trick, it's a lie. But then that would allow Cleveland to send in federal troops. Remember what I told you, they would use black troops, mostly put down black workers, use some racism to divide them. And so, for example, the strike reached all the way, there were strikers in Butte and in Billings, and there were two, they call them colored regiments in Montana for that purpose. And here they're called conspirators for violating the Constitution. Remember, the media portrayed them as bomb-throwing anarchists. Debs is one of them. They broke the strike. So the government put down the strike, forced the workers to go back to work and take lower pay. Meaning we're blacklisted. But it looks like a revolution. What about the next one? It looks like the Great Railroad Strike combined with Cox's Army. Here, you have to write this down, but here's what Cleveland said about it. So he's not hiding his point of view. Not hiding it at all. So Debs, after this, would become the leader of the Socialist Party. I mentioned him before, but it was this he decided the system is rigged. He became a moderate socialist and would run for president 4 times. But he would be attacked, of course, for being an anarchist. Here is Debs, and he has the American Railway Union on his, like a crown. So they're mocking him, and you notice anarchy button. So they can imagine I hated Debs. So let's get to 1896. This pig dog shows us the electoral map. Like the pig dog. So this was a populist cartoon. And the populists are saying the Democrats and the Republicans are the same. The Republicans break unions, the Democrats break unions. Their policies of laissez-faire led to this crash. We have an answer. And so here become represented by Silver. And they're saying the populists can win these states and therefore their electoral votes. The Republicans, represented by Gold or the gold standard, can win these. These will be the key states. Will the silver dog with the golden tail? Will the silver dog, or I'm sorry, will the tail wag the dog or the dog wag the tail? So that's why I'd be crazy and saying pig dog behind, if you've noticed that. So the Republicans nominated from Ohio, of McKinley, Sheriff Benny, William McKinley, who was in the Civil War. He was basically, they engineered him as this great hero. He was at Antietam. He served coffee to General Burnside, who never participated in the battle. That was the only one who's in, but they made him into the Civil War hero. He was a member of the House, of the Senate, the governor of Ohio. And he stood for more laissez-faire and the gold standard. The gold standard, we need stability. A lot of the thing about the government and everyone's broke, we must all tighten our belts together. People still do the same stuff today. He looked like the way people thought a president should look. So with photography, they could see his picture. Now, I guess he was a horrible speaker, just kind of would drone on. That's why I look at this one. They really let him speak. He was a solely owned entity of Marcus Hammond, the Republican boss of Ohio. He controlled McKinley. There's going to be lots of him mocking him. Hannah, boss Hannah, He ran Ohio and therefore ran the Republican Party. This was the height of his power. Because like Benjamin Harrison, Hanna had great influence. McKinley was a solely owned entity of Marcus Hanna. This cartoon is mocking him. And here's Hanna, it's the dollar signs and the diamond brooch. And look how they draw McKinley. Everyone knew he was kind of a dolt. And it's in Hanna. This is supposed to be Henry Clay, who was seen by the end of the century as this, like the epitome of what a politician really should be. Incorruptible, honest. Not quite true, but that's what they thought. That man Clay was an ass. It's better to be president than to be right. And what it means by right is to be morally right. So, he ran what they called the front porch campaign. He basically stayed in the front porch of the governor's mansion in Columbus, Ohio, and didn't campaign at all. Now, there were no real campaigning, but they never let him in public. So there's lots of pictures, this is true, of the front porch. Every once in a while, he'd kind of walk out and go. And walk back in. The Democrats were in disarray. Grover Cleveland wanted to be nominated again, but he stood for the gold standard too. And that, why vote for the same thing? He wasn't quite the same as McKinley, but it's close. So he didn't get the nomination. And because of that, the Democratic convention is going to be hung. Vote after vote, they couldn't come up with a nominee. I should add McKinley or Cleveland was married in office. The first president to ever be married in office. In fact, the only president. Oh, I'm sorry, the second president. Woodrow Wilson was also married. His first wife died. But, and had a child. And you can imagine that was a big deal having a kid and wife. That just didn't happen. And so a confectionery, seeing this, wanted to take advantage of this, is going to make something to take advantage of this. A candy. But you know what? Baby. Her name was Ruth. Baby Ruth. So if you're out of Baby Ruth candy bar, it comes from Grover Cleveland. Grover Cleveland's kid. Does anyone have you had a Baby Ruth? They're not bad, right? They're okay. Not as good as Kit Kats, but they're okay. Who thought, if they had one, thought it was about Babe Ruth, the baseball player? I bet a few did, yeah. All right, so finally, William Jennings Bryan, 36 years old, gave a speech. Now the convention's in Omaha because of the populace. They're trying to cut into the populace vote. And they have this big temporary wooden fire trap built there. And McKinley got up, was just going to give a single speech. And he was not technically running for president, but it was just a disarray. They're just trying to find somebody. And this is arguably the greatest speech in American history. I don't mean as quality, I meant just as an impact. So imagine 10,000 people sitting in this open, hot, musky, smoke-filled convention hall that was literally temporary, quick wooden building they tore down right afterwards. And he got up to give a speech. Big, booming voice, this young man, relatively young man at the time. He was a lawyer from Chicago, moved to Nebraska, lived in a little town, Weeping Water, Nebraska, right near Weeping Water. And I'm just mentioning that because that's very near where my dad was born. And my great uncle idolized William Jennings Bryan. I had to go do many different pilgrimages when I was a little boy. But William Jennings Bryan had no idea what's going on. I mean, like literally 3 years old and I had to go to his grave. Because Uncle Hap said, you're going to his grave. It's my uncle's, what the heck, right? So he gave this speech. And people wanted to hear it. They heard he's a great speaker. He started going, and he's an incredible speaker. One of those charismatics who could just grab people and pull them in and bring them up and down emotionally, have them applaud and sit down. He just had them all. And when he would stop, they would all gasp and wait for the next words. Brilliant speaker. He always had that gift. So he finished the speech with some of the greatest words. So I'm going to read it to you. So everyone get comfortable. It's going to take a few hours. It says, if they dare come out in the open field and defend the gold standard as a good thing, we will fight them to the uttermost, having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere. We will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. Be quiet. What? You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. And it was quiet for about 10 seconds. No one really knew exactly what it meant, but it sounded great. And then they stormed the stage, picked him up on their shoulders, and made him the nominee by proclamation. Just right there. Out of nowhere, this unknown man, just barely old enough to run for president by 1 year, it's the Democratic nominee and will become one of the most prominent politicians in American history. Out of nowhere. Just an amazing speech. The cross of gold. Well, he talked about against the gold standard, anti-monopoly, free silver. Who else wanted that? What political party? What about the populists? They're kind of now on a tightrope. Get it? See the tightrope? Like that? Yeah. Okay. What do? If they nominate somebody different, that will split the vote and ensure a Republican victory. And the populists who met 2 weeks later in Omaha again, this was, I think, the high point of Omaha. They nominated Bryan too. So Bryan would be both a populist and a Democrat on the ticket. Sure. I know it seems weird, but yeah. And two things about it. First off, so here's a party. This is a pro-Bryan populist cartoon. And it shows a number of different things. So it's taking the cross of gold, clever. But you notice they put Republican Party. So it's an anti-Republican. And there's Labor. And who's putting the cross of gold? Hannah. And you see the little McKinley in his pocket. That's a clever cartoon. But this also shows the extreme prejudice of the populace. This is supposed to represent the Jewish bank, the Rothschild. It's horrifically racist. It's a terrible caricature of a Jewish man. Horrifically racist. And you'll see this in all kinds of anti-Semitic tropes. You'll see this in KKK stuff. You'll see this in Nazi propaganda, almost the same picture. And so it shows the problematic nature of this. Part of the reason why they can never appeal to urban people. Here's another one. Here shows Bryan as the populist snake swallowing the Democratic Party. That's not what happened at all. Yeah. 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 Well, the populists were still a party. And so they're thinking, well, we don't want to split the votes. We just, if they vote for populists, they'll vote for Bryan. If they vote for Democrat, they'll vote for Bryan. You combine those two, that should be enough to beat the Republicans. They were hoping. But it was the other way around. That would be the end of the populists. Here's the balloon popping. That'd be the end of the populists. They rolled the die. And they're going to have to join the Democrats. Now they would all, and this would be the beginning of a shift of the Democratic Party to more of those. Remember I told you about those liberal economics? It's going to take a while, but it would be at the shift. But by 1932, the Democrats are going to elect Franklin Roosevelt. And even though he's one of the richest men in America, he was a populist. That's Franklin Roosevelt. And so the Democrats did, and the Democrats would kind of have that populist party background up until the 1970s, then everything's going to blow up. So with that, free silver became his plan. Inflation. They called it loose money too, just get more money in circulation. Also, anti-monopoly, workers' rights, do all of these things. But because of their rural, anti-immigrant, just had this anti-urban bias, Bryan would go around the country and give speeches all over. Little town, you whistle stop at the back of a train or quickly set up diets and give these speeches. And they were brilliant. People just loved hearing them speak. But it also had the elements of almost like a Protestant tent revival, the Second Great Awakening, which turned off, let's say, Catholics. And it it just had that, it was an interesting contradiction. But this election would turn into like gold versus silver. And so the Republicans stood for gold, and Republicans were a little bug. They called them gold bugs. And a little gold bug. Democrats were a little silver bug. And so here, gold, silver, or a little penny. And gold came to represent stability, money. We wanted to mean something solid like gold we can hold. Because the people who don't really understand the way money functions, which is understandable, we have lives to live, so not everyone understands that, but it seems like that's more stable. Even though the price of gold fluctuates all the time, so it's actually not stable. We'll find that out in World War I and the Great Depression, or the 1970s. For silver, it just generically meant we're going to help working people with higher wages. So there's Brian giving a couple speeches. Here he is. This is 98. This is 1900 when he ran for president. This is 1908 when he ran for president. You get the point here. Very prominent, didn't win. I love this one. He's got everyone cheering. I guess it was just unreal. But he's going bald really fast at this time. But the picture of him still has hair, so I think that's kind of amusing. The other thing I find really amusing is this, by the way, it happens. I love this guy. He's sitting there. God, I've heard this 10 times already. No matter how good a speech it is, I've heard this before. I'll tell you when we get to 1963 and the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and what if some of Martin Luther King's advisors were saying when he's doing this speech, like, oh God, I've heard this before. And it was like, that was so great. You heard it 10 times. Well, Brian's going to be attacked as a radical, AKA, what's BTA? Bomb throwing anarchist. So here's an anti-Brian cartoon showing, look what happens if you vote for Democrats and free silver. We'll become like South America, just generically, or China, these impoverished countries that all have free silver. Well, they have nothing of the sort. This is what we call blind, but they figure we don't care. All they know is people in the United States think we got to be better off than people in, at this time, India or Japan or Guatemala. Do you want to go down to their level? And we're going to jump right to this. When the election finally finished, Red's Brian in this one. Everyone got that? Red's Brian. The popular vote was relatively close. And if you look at just by square miles, doesn't it look like Brian's pretty close? All these states, all the industrialized states, this is still pre-secret ballot. And workers were told point blank at big companies, you vote for McKinley or you're fired. And say you're voting right now, we're going to be like this. There you go. You got it. You're going to be fine. Yeah, so they, basically they were told you're going to lose your job if you don't vote for the game. Secret ballots is going to be a big reform that the populists did want. And this election is going to prove urban interests will dominate. Now, when I'm urban, I'm not talking about like workers or renters in cities or factory workers. I mean the financial interests which focus in cities. The financial interests. And that includes the factory owners, but the banks, the investment banks, stocks and bonds. Money flows to the financial center. So they flow from places like, I think Butte's a great example. Where did all that money that they dug out of that hill go? It didn't stay in Montana. If you don't believe me, let's take another trip to Butte. You'll find out. Where did it go? It went out. It went to what? It went to New York City. Went to California. I saw the Clark family elements of that in Santa Barbara. Next, money became more important than ever before. Brian raised $300,000. $300,000, which was seen as a lot of money at that time. John D. Rockefeller gave $300,000 alone, just himself, to McKinley. McKinley raised $7 million. Money will become dominant. Dominant. And the wealthy will be overjoyed at this. But last thing to write down, This will reform but reform movements for capitalism will be triggered by this. The progressives to a lesser degree than Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. And the last big reform of capitalism would happen in the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson in the 1960s. All right, gather your stuff together. Let's go to the library. Yes. Don't know. Why don't we bring everything? If we have time to come back, we'll come back. Sound good? Bring everything in case we don't. I bet we'll have time. One more thing. Yes, The Wizard of Oz was a parable of populism. Who had seen The Wizard of Oz? Here is it's all about populism. Not now, because we're out of the library. Look at this little thing in here that was in the TV to describe. That I think is hilarious. To stay in the basement, please be polite to other classes, take off to the library. Hey, remind me again, I'll tell you real quick on Monday, a couple of the ways to get. I know, we got to the end, we didn't have enough time.
Is the animal study a metaphor for again?
And it's no power, so like the winter's coming.
And the cowardly lion blind because we tossed up. You're exactly right. I think I forgot to turn the camera on, so it was 10 minutes of nothing but blank room. You still go to school there. That's awesome. No, we do, we go like the last 10 minutes of class. We just do it Monday. Monday?
Yeah, cool, thank you.